When a 42-year-old nurse is found bludgeoned to death, a small town in New Jersey is in shock.
It was a vicious attack.
Her hands were bound with an extension cord.
A minimum of 21 hits in the head.
I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Police suspect her boyfriend, but a psychic says the killer is someone else.
I saw a man, saw a hammer, a tied-up woman in her bed.
Can a psychic's vision solve the mystery of who killed Betty Cornish?
The killer lives upstairs.
Belvedere, New Jersey, an hour away from New York City, but a million miles away from big city crime. A town where neighbors trust each other and doors are seldom locked.
It's a very quiet town. Everybody knows everyone. It's just one of those small communities.
Basically a little rural town that hadn't really changed over the decades.
Until August 8th, 1987. A frantic emergency call comes in from a man who says he's found his girlfriend dead. Kent Swigert, now chief of Belvedere Police, is the first on the scene.
I entered the apartment and observed a male standing in the living room. And this male said to me, "Is she dead?" So I walked into the bedroom and I observed a female lying face up in the bed. It was pretty obvious that she was killed.
The crime is so horrific that the Belvedere Police need help. Dave Heater of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office is assigned to the case.
It was a vicious attack. We had a minimum of 21 hits in the head. There was blood spattered 360 degrees on all four walls, the ceiling. There was blood pooled on the floor.
She was laying face up, her arms were behind her back, her hands were bound with an extension cord.
Her nightshirt was pulled up over her head.
Totally blood-soaked, along with the sheet around about her head that was also blood-soaked.
There was exposed bone, and extreme damage to the forehead.
The victim is 42-year-old Betty Cornish, a divorced mother with 5 grown daughters. She worked as a practical nurse.
She was a good mom.
She liked to go out dancing, and she had a big circle of friends that she would go out with.
She had recently moved back to Belvedere to be closer to her family.
It was something I just couldn't believe. I was like, what do you mean, you know? What do you mean my sister's dead?
So vicious was the attack that at first police think she was killed by gunfire.
My sister Mary Beth called. She just said something happened and that they thought she was shot.
And I know I started going crazy that I wanted to go with her because I knew they were going to take her body to Newark for an autopsy. And I just kept saying, she's going to be alone, she's going to be alone, I want to be with her.
The autopsy report shows that Betty Cornish died of blunt force injuries consistent with a hammer attack.
When we started to find out from the autopsy reports that the claw end of the hammer was used and that it penetrated into the skull, it was gruesome.
This was an angry person. Whether it came as a result of a fight, whether the victim had fought with him, he was mad, angry at something, and he took it out on the victim.
The murder was so violent that the police assume Betty's neighbors must have heard something.
We're having a very difficult time. We're not getting anyone within the apartment complex that's giving us anything. There were no screams, there was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual.
And apart from the vicious attack to the victim, there is nothing unusual in the apartment except for blood in the bathroom.
We found blood in the bathroom, and we found blood around the sink and also on the mirrors. We had made the assumption that our suspect had probably cleaned up there.
At first, it looks as if the killer came through the window, because the victim's window was removed and found leaning against the building. But a fingerprint found on the glass tells the police a very different story.
That fingerprint would have had to have been someone from the inside grabbing the window. The idea that if someone did jump in, they would have to grab a hold of the sill in order to pull themselves in. There would have had to been striations across that wooden sill from the body sliding across. There were no striations.
That leads police to believe Betty Cornish knew her killer.
We believe that that window was removed to draw us off because he was located so close to the victim.
So the police zero in on her boyfriend.
He found the body, he reported the crime. When we began to question him, he indicated that he had been out fishing that day. Some of the other investigators who were going around the apartment came in to us to tell us that they found a set of clippers that a fisherman would typically use was located directly below the bedroom window of the victim. That became very suspicious to us because he said he had been fishing.
It was shocking, but I kind of thought that maybe it was the boyfriend because I didn't know Paul that well.
Could he be the one who removed the window?
We started questioning her boyfriend more and more, and honestly, I believe he got scared.
Before police can further question him, he stops talking.
He asked for an attorney at the time. So we couldn't talk to him any further, and his attorney advised him not to speak with us or cooperate with us at any point.
Now, after 3 days and no hard leads, the people in town are uneasy.
This was the first murder that Belvedere had experienced in really 80 to 100 years. The people in the immediate area of Blair House Apartments were very, very scared at the time. There was a crowd of people that had watched what was going on, and there was fear that there might be more people in danger.
Everything, my whole complete life changed overnight. I didn't have a place to live anymore. I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Nothing's ever normal again.
Residents in the apartment complex, eager to help the police, volunteer for polygraph tests, and they all pass. It seems as if the police have hit a wall.
The longer that a case goes on, your chances lessen greatly by the hour. That starts to scare you. There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
You imagine a monster. Only a monster could do something like that, and that's what we were afraid of. What kind of crazy person that could be out there?
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know. I remember calling the prosecutor's office. Did they find him yet? Did they find this person that killed my sister yet? That's when someone had told me about Nancy.
Nancy Weber is a psychic who claims to be able to see what most of us cannot.
It's not always in picture form. Sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's smells, sometimes it's vision, sometimes it's a feel of fabric.
8 days after her sister's murder, Peggy calls psychic Nancy Weber and sets up a meeting.
And she didn't want to know anything. Nancy didn't want to know anything. And she took me into this room and we began to talk.
I felt this horrible, heartbreaking misery.
Without any knowledge of the case, the psychic claims to tune in to Peggy's loss.
Somehow that connected inside me with she had sustained a great and tragic loss of a family member. She had a sister who was murdered.
And then she says something amazing.
I said to her that the chief suspect is a boyfriend. She said, yes. I said, he is not the killer.
But can the psychic see who the real killer is?
I saw a hammer. I saw a tied-up woman in her bed. I saw her brutally murdered. And I thought, that's the killer.
In Belvedere, New Jersey, it's been 8 days since 42-year-old Betty Cornish was found bludgeoned to death in her bed.
There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
Her boyfriend, who found the body, isn't talking, and the police have few hard leads.
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know.
Desperate to find the killer, the victim's sister asks a psychic for help, and the psychic has a vision of the murder, a vision so horrific, she feels she can only share it with the police.
I asked her to please contact the police involved. I said, let them speak with me, not you.
I received a call from Peggy Goebel. She told me that she had been talking to a woman who was a psychic. I'm skeptical, you know, when a psychic calls up or says that they have psychic ability. I want to hear who it is and what they have to say before I'm going to put a lot of faith into that individual.
But in this case, it's Nancy Weber.
So I said, okay, now I'm listening.
The detective and the psychic have worked together before on other cases.
I would be more than happy to bring her to the scene and get her thoughts, her feelings on what occurred here, because we're now beginning to get into a week into this case and we're getting nowhere.
No sooner do the detective and the psychic arrive at the scene than Nancy has a vision that will turn the investigation upside down.
I looked upstairs, and I saw a shadow, and I thought, that's the killer. He was going upstairs. He lives there. I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs. I said, his first name's John, and last initial R.
She gave me the name John, and she gave me the initials JR.
The man upstairs is 30-year-old John Reese, a farm laborer who lives with his girlfriend and her 2 children.
He operated a piece of heavy equipment at the sod farm, just a working-class individual.
And I said, well, I'm not real sure that's the right guy, Nancy. He already passed a polygraph.
Not only has John Reese passed a polygraph, but he has an alibi for the time police think Betty was murdered.
Based on what the condition of the body and what we knew at that time, we were guessing that the time of death would have been somewhere around midnight. John Reese was able to tell us pretty specifically where he was during the entire day, right up until the point of about 2 o'clock in the morning, and at that point he went to bed. He alibied himself pretty well.
I said, that doesn't matter. It was such a strong feeling and strong vision.
At that point in my mind, I was beyond Mr. Reese. He passed a polygraph. She said that she didn't care, that, polygraph him again, do what you have to do, but he's the guy.
Next, Detective Heater takes the psychic inside Betty Cornish's bedroom.
Crime scene hadn't been cleaned up. There was still blood spattered around. It was scary to walk in and not know what lay there.
As Nancy stands beside the victim's bed, she is hit with another vision.
Ben, I got the time of about 1:30 a.m. roughly.
Her vision puts the time of death much later than what the police say.
And this was one of the few times Dave actually responded to me and said, no, it was earlier. I said, no, wrong, because I had a very strong impression of a time, and I had a very strong impression of a murderer.
Could the psychic be right? Could the killer be John Reese?
She made me think more. Like, I knew he was a suspect, but I was a suspect. Everybody was. So when she kept pushing it is when I started to believe it. They found it.
Passed the polygraph. She knew that he still did it.
He was there when the police arrived. He was there when the detectives arrived. He was there when they removed the body. And he was just there. Every time someone would look, there was John Reese.
It's the psychic's final vision that turns the investigation on its head.
I see this blur of a metallic buckle that I am told in my mind is a Western belt buckle that has meaning and value to John Reese.
Heater sends an investigator to see if Nancy is right.
Reese, in fact, had the belt buckle and was very consistent with everything that Nancy had described.
With this new piece of information, Detective Heater goes out on a limb and takes a second look at the man upstairs.
I, as a supervisor, at least now at this point, had some kind of justification in my own mind for spending man-hours on a man who already passed a polygraph.
He decides to take a gamble on a psychic's vision.
My boss basically told me I was crazy.
Heater sends detectives to question Reese again.
Reese was very comfortable with these 2 detectives and was willing to talk to them every day. They became almost like friends. And because of that investigative bond, Reese started talking about more things.
Detective Tom Trainer was one of the officers investigating Reese.
He gave information that caused us to believe that he might have been in the victim's apartment. It wasn't a real credible account of how or why he was in there. And of course, meanwhile, one of our ID men had developed, the latent prints off the front window.
11 days after the murder, the first solid piece of damning evidence. The fingerprint belongs to John Reese.
Trainer went after Reese again and told him, look, we've got your fingerprint on the window. What's the story? Oh, well, You know, we're friends, Betty and I would come down there and, you know, the window would get stuck. So, you know, I would help her unjam the window to get it closed.
John Reese said that he was there to fix the window, and the window never got stuck. We had to put a stick underneath it to hold it up because it wouldn't stay stuck.
Another break. The medical examiner revises the time of death. Betty Cornish didn't die at midnight as the police thought. She died much later.
We got results back from the medical examiner's office, which gave us a time of death more into the early morning hours.
Just as the psychic told police at a time when Reese has no alibi.
The biggest problem that we had was the time period in the 3 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning area. We felt that there was something he was holding back.
We had his fingerprint from inside the apartment. We knew that he was lying to us at this point in time.
But the police have to make a case that will stand up in court. They need the murder weapon. Can the psychic help?
I saw a swamp, and so I told them, this is where you'll find the hammer.
Thanks to a psychic's vision. Police in Belvedere, New Jersey now have a prime suspect in the brutal killing of a 42-year-old nurse.
I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs.
But they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him. They need the murder weapon, and the psychic claims she knows where it is.
I suddenly saw this small body of messy, muddy water and the hammer falling into it. And I thought, he dropped it in there.
Nancy, when she returned to our office, she drew us a map.
Took a piece of paper and drew my crude map and handed it to them and said, this is where you'll find the hammer.
She gave us a road, she gave us a patch that she said were woods, and she said, and over in this corner is water. And she said, I see Reese throwing the hammer into the woods.
But she can't tell the police where that water is located. At the same time, detectives continue to badger their prime suspect, determined to find cracks in his story.
He was able to give detailed information about, you know, when he made the coffee, when he got up in the morning to go to work, and what time he left for work. But then the time when we felt that the victim was murdered was a time that he didn't recall. He just breezed right over it.
Reese started talking about more things. And those things that he kept adding into his statement during the times was things that were off, that were not talked about before.
There's a lot of little things that he changes in his behavior between, you know, deep breaths. You could tell something is bothering him. And we just felt at that point that he was ready to tell us something.
Detectives make their move. They bring Reese in.
We hit him with all the things that we knew, walked around the table, sat down next to him, looked him in the eye, and said, John, we know you did it, and you know you did it. Now, why don't you tell us about it? Approximately 20 to 25 minutes, perhaps half an hour later, Detective Traynor came out of that room and advised us that he had confessed to the murder.
I believe he knew that we knew that he was the killer, and for some reason he had to share that with us. It's hard to picture why or how, but something made him realize that, you know, it was wrong and that he had to trust us and that he did it and he had to admit that.
There was a hammer on the floor that I picked up, and I hit her once in the head with it. I hit her 2, 3, 4 times with the hammer. Large amount of blood flowed on the bed, some on the walls. And I went upstairs. Garbage bag. Washed up my hand and everything. Had another beer upstairs.
Later, he told the police he dumped the hammer at the farm where he works.
When we did the search through the woods and we came out, there was the water in front of us. Water where Nancy said there would be water. We went in, we recovered the hammer, photographed it, brought it out, bagged it, tagged it, and put it into evidence.
18 days after beating Betty Cornish to death, John Reese is charged with her murder.
And I remember just my mother and father and I embracing and jumping up and down, happy that they caught him. But realizing that it just wouldn't bring her back.
Despite the confession, Reese later pleads not guilty. At the trial, his lawyers suggest Betty Cornish invited Reese into her apartment.
It was very hard because we would have to sit and see the murderer there every day.
A lot of the time, Mr. Reese basically propped his head on his hand and just seemed somewhat disinterested for the most part. He didn't want to show any expression to the jury, so he just basically sat like he was bored.
And he would, constantly turn his head and look at us. I remember my mother being there, and she was crying. It was hard for her to hold back her cries, and they wanted to put her out of the room. They didn't want the jurors to see my mother crying because it would sway their decision.
The jury doesn't believe John Reese's story. What they do believe is that sometime around 3 a.m., Reese came downstairs and snuck into Betty Cornish's apartment, bound her wrists with an extension cord, sexually assaulted her, and beat her to death, striking her at least 21 times with a hammer. After a 5-week trial, Reese is found guilty of all 11 charges, including first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 110 years.
I would like him to say he was sorry. I would like him to show some remorse because he never has.
I think that if he were to say anything, that he would try to hurt us in some way because he is sick enough. He got 2 life sentences. He's eligible for parole in 45 years. So that means that he will be 72.
Or dead.
Or dead. And we will fight so that he dies in prison.
Why was the psychic so convinced that it was the man upstairs who killed Betty Cornish? He had already passed a lie detector test, yet she remained adamant her vision was correct. She knew his initials were JR, and his first name was John. She also knew that he wore a large, Western-style belt buckle. She even directed the police toward the murder weapon.
Nancy was probably one of the driving forces that kept me going back to Reese. I was willing to give him up, but she was very insistent.
Any constructive thing I can do assists Elizabeth and her soul and assists her family.
And whether you want to call it spiritual matter, whatever it is that a psychic sees, you've got to be able to believe in it. There's science, there may be the supernatural. I don't know how to explain what a psychic does, how they do it. All I know is it works.
This time on Psychic Investigators. When a college student vanishes, everyone's looking.
None of her friends had any information, had no idea where Kim Antonakos was.
Then, a psychic sees a twisted plot.
I knew there were men. I knew they were waiting for her. You could feel the ropes.
And says she's in grave danger.
Let's say she played in a sandbox that she didn't belong in.
Can the psychic help to solve the mystery of what happened to Kim Antonakos?
I knew she was alive, and I knew they had to find her right away.
Brooklyn, New York. In 1995, the borough suffers more than its fair share of the city's long tradition of crime and violence. A place where sometimes innocent people get hurt. It's nearly 4 a.m. on March 1st. After a night out in Manhattan, 20-year-old college student Kim Antonakos drops her friend, Liz Pace, at her apartment in Canarsie. Then drives a few blocks to her own apartment. Later that day, Kim's dad gets a call. Kim is a no-show at her part-time job. It's totally out of character. Tommy Antonakos immediately calls Kim's friends. No one has seen her.
Tommy came into the precinct shortly after not being able to get in contact with his daughter. I think it was about a day. And he had come into the 69th precinct in Canarsie to make a missing persons report.
Generally, the police wait 24 hours to investigate a missing person. But this time, they move fast.
I don't know, something just said, run with this one. I don't have a good feeling about this case.
Detective Phil Turcola is on duty that day.
I reported to the missing persons squad, and I started to open up a case and investigate this myself.
Pretty and vivacious, Kim is popular and has a wide circle of friends. An only child, her parents are divorced. Her father, a successful businessman, lives close by. Her mother, in Florida.
Kimberly was a sweet girl, but naive. She had a little fire. She was a lot of fun. She was. She had a good way about her. She had a generous heart.
Detective Turcola suggests Tommy check Kim's parking spot for her car.
And then he called me, and he says, I think you need to come here. I found something. Her car was not there, but there was an earring on the garage floor. Don't know if that earring was there, fell out of a car, if she was wearing it, but I realized one person would know if she was wearing it, and that'd be Liz Pace.
Kim's friend Liz Pace confirms Kim was wearing both earrings the previous night.
Now I know that the car was in that garage, Kim was out of the car, and that earring fell off. I knew she was a victim of a crime. There was no doubt in my mind.
The detective's first thought is that Kim may have been carjacked.
I immediately put an alarm out over the NYPD's internal computer system, describing her to be on the lookout. I got in contact with the Aviation Bureau, and I asked them to look at the spots where cars are normally dumped.
Oh, we were out there, nonstop. I guess the adrenaline kicks in. Sleep don't matter.
I live on Long Island. Every night that I left Canarsie, I drive through parts of East New York, which are known auto stripping parts. People steal cars, auto strip them, and dump them. Cars are recovered all the time in certain desolate parts of Brooklyn.
But Detective Turcola finds nothing. Later that day, when Kim's father arrives home, his answering machine is flashing. But there are no messages. Curiously, someone has phoned and hung up twice. The police check morgues and hospitals. Nothing. They speak to Kim's friends and neighbors and to the couple staying at Kim's place, Joshua Torres and April Dedali.
None of her friends had any information, had no idea where Kim Antonakos was.
2 days pass with no sign of Kim. Her mother, Marlene, arrives from Florida. A family friend suggests that Marlene sees psychic Ellie Crystal.
A woman called me, quite hysterical, actually, and she asked for a reading. She had to have it that night. It was an emergency. This was Kim's mom, Marlene, who had called me.
Host of her own local cable show, Crystal calls herself a medium. She says spirits come to her from the bridge outside her window.
I realized after I lived here for a while that it's almost like harmonics. The two end posts are like tuning forks, and the cables represent the harmonics. Spirits seem to be very drawn and attracted to the bridge, and it just kind of became like a dimensional doorway for me.
2 days after Kim's disappearance, her mother Marlene arrives with one of her daughter's friends at Ellie Crystal's Brooklyn apartment.
They showed me a picture. I started seeing images. I knew she was alive, and I knew they had to find her right away.
Kim Antonakos has been missing for 3 days. Brooklyn police suspect foul play, but they have no real leads. Her mother asks a psychic for help. Ellie Crystal says her daughter is alive, but in grave danger. The psychic channels the young woman's spirit and tries to pinpoint her location.
To go into her body is to feel very cold and very chilled. Her whole energy was very weak and fading. I felt she was dehydrated, she has not eaten, and that if somebody didn't find her very soon, she would die.
Ellie Crystal says she can see what the police already suspect, that Kimberly has been abducted.
I feel that she made an attempt to escape, but they got her. So you could feel that, you know, she had been taken as a prisoner. You could feel the ropes. And there was definitely this feeling of being tied up. I also felt that whoever was involved in this abduction knew her very well. I knew they were men. I knew they were waiting for her. This is kids who are getting either back at her or looking to get some money from the family. It was one or the other. Marlene was crying. She started to cry right away. The whole thing was an extremely emotional reading.
Before the session closes, the psychic has one more cryptic clue.
The letter J was a letter that came to me at the time. I saw it as children would write their letter J. It was connected to the person who had taken her. It came as a male and young and Brooklyn.
Marlene promises to pass on the paranormal clues to the police. But first, back at Kim's apartment, friends and family have gathered to listen to the psychic's tape.
I see her
Tied up. Abducted. The letter J.
struggling.
Suddenly, Kim's roommate Josh Torres and his friend Julio Negron jump to their feet. They say that they're going out to search for Kim. At 3 that morning, a fire crew responds to a fire in an empty house on 86th Avenue in Woodhaven, Queens. The flames are easily checked. But in the basement, a grim discovery. A half-charred human body. The long hair suggests it's a woman.
There was the remnants of a chair. The body was burnt beyond recognition.
Queens homicide detective Louis Pia was assigned to the case.
She had no shoes on. She was partially bound with her hands behind her back, and her feet were bound with duct tape.
Arson investigators established the fire was set intentionally with gasoline. The coroner's report reveals the woman was burned alive.
We started making calls. We had a body, and we wanted to see if people had reported anybody missing. So we called the missing person squad. We were told that there was 2 individuals, one of which was a female in the 6-9 precinct who was reported missing a few days earlier by her father.
And that's when the phone rang. And it was Queens. And they had said they had a female deceased, victim of a homicide that fit the description of Kim Antonakos.
A description that includes some unique body art.
Kimberly Antonakos had some very distinctive tattoos on her back, on her leg.
The tattoos. An infinity sign. A scorpion. It's almost certainly Kim Antonakos.
I got Tommy sitting at my desk, and I walked out. I couldn't even look at Tom. I went into another office, and I sat there. My week came to a screeching halt. And my worst fears came true. I just couldn't bring myself to go back out and talk to Tom. But I knew I had to, so I did. And he's like, "What's going on?" I said, "You know, Tom," I said, "there's some guys are gonna come in here and talk to you in a couple of minutes." That was it. My case ended. Case closed.
So we took a ride over to the 6-9 precinct. It was very difficult to tell him that we had a body that was burned beyond recognition, and we're going to need dental records to positively confirm that the individual was his daughter.
A missing person case is now a homicide investigation. A 21-year-old New York woman missing for 3 days has been found dead, burned alive. A psychic says the letter J is connected to her killer. When the brutal crime hits the headlines, even jaded New Yorkers are outraged.
Your mind starts playing games. You get angry. You want to look for the people that did it.
They tied her up in this cold basement, totally dark, and just left her there.
Pete Donahue covers the story for the New York Daily News.
It was a very normal neighborhood. I mean, it's not a neighborhood that you would drive through and expect something like this to happen at all. Just, nice, modest, middle-class homes. And the neighbors were shocked that something like this could happen.
Weeks go by. Though the police have several suspects on their radar, they don't have enough evidence for an arrest. The psychic was right about the abduction, about Kim being tied up and close to death. Could she help the police to find the killer?
Tom Antonakos would call on a daily basis, and he would say, listen, guys, if nothing is going on and you have nothing at this point in time, would you go see a psychic? I shouldn't talk for anyone else, but my assumption was that it was all, full of baloney. But I couldn't tell Tom.
Tommy called and he said that Marlene was impressed with the information I had given her and could he come by with 2 police officers, and I said absolutely, no problem.
On the following Saturday, Tommy, his brother Joey, Detective Pia and his partner visit Ellie Crystal.
Crystal balls, I don't believe in them. But Tommy's motivation was to find out what happened, and whatever it took, whether it took seances or a crystal ball, he would do it to my brother.
One of the policemen, the one sitting closer to me, he asked a lot of questions. This is when Kim started coming to me.
She told us that there were 4 individuals involved in the homicide. She said that she saw the letter J as being the first letter of the names of the individuals involved. She kept seeing the letter J.
The letter J resonates with the police. Joshua Torres, who is temporarily staying with Kim with his wife and baby, is a suspect, as are his friends Jose Negron and Julio Negron, who, despite their names, are not related. Another friend of Torres, Nicholas Libretti, goes by the street name Little J. 4 suspects, 4 men whose names start with J, one of whom was living in Kim's apartment.
What do you look for? Justice? Vengeance? So many things go through your mind.
This was front-page news. It was shocking and puzzling, and it was very difficult for people to come to grips with what happened. People were petrified. They didn't know, who was walking down their sidewalk in the middle of the night,
Despite the psychic's clues, it seems the police are no closer to closing the murder case. Weeks, then months pass. Then, on September 6, 1995, 6 months after Kim Antonakos disappeared, the police catch a major break. Friends of Joshua Torres, the guy who was temporarily staying at Kim's apartment, say he's been bragging about her murder.
And I got a call from the detective, and he basically said to me, listen, I got this girl and guy in here, and they're alleging that this guy, Joshua Torres, confessing that he burned Kimberly Antonakos, abducted her for a ransom, and so on, and gave all the particulars. From that point on, the investigation started to go full force.
First, the police bring Joshua's friend Julio Negron in for questioning, and he eventually cracks.
We interviewed him at great length, and he actually confessed, and he agreed to cooperate with the district attorney's office. And then from there, we went and we grabbed Joshua and Nick Libretti simultaneously on the same day.
Torres, the roommate, denies everything. But Nick Libretti, faced with Julio Negron's confession, also cracks. Between them, they reveal a kidnapping scheme that went very, very wrong.
All they had to do was just ask. We both would have gave anything to have her back.
Involved were Joshua Torres, Nicholas Libretti, a.k.a. Little J, Julio Negron, and Jose Negron, all J's, just as the psychic predicted.
This was just animals that were fools and they were idiots.
The trial of Joshua Torres, the ringleader, opens on November 1st, 1996. He pleads innocent.
Josh Torres is a particularly twisted and grotesque personality. He's an evil individual.
Gene Reebstein prosecutes the case.
I believe Josh thought she was a good target for ransom demand because he could tell, one, that she had a lot of resources, and two, that her family cared for her. The way he looked at it there is there's money there and there's affection there. And those are two things Josh knows. Well, to get one, he knows how to use the other.
Torres, who already had a criminal record, easily roped his friends into a scheme. The prosecution argues that at approximately 4 a.m. on March 1st, 1995, as Kim Antonakos parked her car in the garage across from her Brooklyn apartment, Nicholas and Jose grabbed her and drove her to a vacant home in Queens. There, they tied her up in the basement with no heat, no food, and no water, and left her for 3 days. Joshua Torres phoned Kim's father twice to play a pre-recorded ransom demand. But, by accident, he played the ransom tape too early for it to be recorded. Later, when Joshua and Julio heard the recording of the psychic session, they panicked, thinking she was onto them. That same night, they drove over to Queens, planning to set Kim free. But after 3 days in the cold without food and water, she was comatose. The cruel, bungling gang assumed she was dead. Joshua decided to burn the evidence.
These guys, Torres and Liberty, had absolutely no remorse. I mean, you got the sense that they just looked like at other people like bugs. You know, they had no feeling, they had no sense of value of life.
The jury hears that just as Joshua Torres lit the fatal match, he whispered to Kim, "Life sucks." Despite the evidence, Joshua denies all the charges, but the jury thinks otherwise.
And Tommy said he didn't want the death penalty for these guys. He wanted them to suffer as long as possible.
And he should rot in jail for the rest of his life, and he should never come out.
Joshua Torres is convicted of arson, kidnapping, and first-degree murder, and sentenced to 58 years. As for Nicholas Libretti, or Little J, he's also sentenced to 58 years, but dies in prison of AIDS less than 2 years later. A year later, in November 1996, Julio Negron is sentenced to 6 years as an accessory because he did nothing to stop the crime. Jose Negron never gets to trial, as in June 1995, he was gunned down on a street in Queens. From the beginning, the psychic seemed to key in so clearly to Kim and her killers.
One of the things from Ellie's reading that I was present at that was astonishing was that she was right on the money with the letter J. I mean, you had Joshua, you had Julio, you had Jose Negron, okay? And you also had an individual that we were looking at in the investigation that was known as Little J.
I think there are psychics out there that are good at what they do. I think they do have that extra sense. It's kind of like an enhanced gut feeling.
The last time I saw Tommy, he told me that everything had been taken care of. There was a feeling with Tommy of completion, that whatever this whole scenario was that involved his daughter's kidnapping and murder and the capturing of the criminals, it had come to a conclusion already. It was over. After that, I knew I wasn't going to see Tommy again.
It was hard after. That was Daddy's little girl. 100%. She had him wrapped. Can't put it any better than that. That was his heart.
Tommy went to Kimberly's grave regularly. I mean, he went there on her birthday. He went there on holidays. He invited me to come after one of the verdicts. And he went and he said, you know, we did it, baby. We got that piece of garbage.
In 2005, 10 years after his daughter's grisly death, Tommy dies of cancer.
I think in the end, he felt he had nothing to live for. He died of a broken heart.
In 1987, when 2 teenage girls are murdered in Thunder Bay, Canada, the police fear the worst.
I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Police think they've got their man, but a psychic says they're wrong.
I felt terrible, but I had to tell him I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
In the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
Then, 13 years later, a stone-cold case comes back to life. Was the psychic right all along?
I knew I had seen that face so clearly.
On the shores of Lake Superior sits Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. In the 1600s, a fur trading post. Today, a struggling industrial town. On Sunday, May 10th, 1987, Mother's Day, an elderly couple out on their morning walk discover the body of a young woman laying in a gravel pit. First to arrive on the scene is Constable Jerry Moran of the Ontario Provincial Police.
The body was located right in this area here. The top had been pulled up and her jeans were undone. Her shoes were removed and laid beside the body.
Police comb the scene and find a plastic bag containing a beer bottle and what appears to be the undergarments of their victim.
The thing that was going through my mind at the time was
somebody's Mother's Day had been ruined for the rest of their lives.
But Detective Moran has a job to do and puts his personal feelings aside.
You treat it very businesslike. You're detached. Any short-lived evidence, anything that weather could destroy, we have to try to preserve that as fast as possible.
At the scene, police also find shoe prints and tire marks. The young woman is identified as 17-year-old high school student Donna Tebenham.
The body of 17-year-old Donna Tebenham was found yesterday afternoon in a gravel pit north of the city. As for details, that's about all the OPP is releasing so far.
The circumstances surrounding it dictates that we are or have forwarded the body to the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto for expert examination.
Donna Tebenham was your typical 16-year-old girl. You know, she went to school, she had friends.
Julio Gomes is a local journalist for the Thunder Bay Chronicle.
I've lived all my life in Thunder Bay, and at the time I was a teenager as well. And I know my own feeling was one of shock.
An autopsy reveals she died of asphyxiation. There were small traces of alcohol in her body, but no drugs. A sample of semen is also recovered. Another curious clue. Tiny specks of blue paint were lifted from her clothing.
The blue paint was at one point used on a specific year of pickup trucks. Anybody that wanted to paint their vehicle could have painted it that blue, but we had established, based on the wheelbase and the axle width, that it was a truck.
Police learned that Donna had spent the previous evening visiting friends. She was last seen walking back from a local corner store at about 11 p.m. Calls from the public kept police busy, but brought them no closer to a suspect.
We had so many suspects, or what could be considered persons of interest, but as it turned out, in all the cases, it was a dead end. People would come forward and just say that they have reason to suspect this person because they said something. They said they may have seen this girl at a party, or they said that they went to school with this girl and they've done things to this girl and things like that. They were blowhards at a party, most of them, that would just want to get attention for themselves and admit to doing anything. And all these guys were subsequently ruled out as suspects.
Another snag. Partial fingerprints found on the beer bottle at the scene turn up no matches. With no suspects, and with no DNA testing in 1987, the semen sample sat on the shelf. The most promising clue police had appeared to be the blue repaint chips found on the body, but record-keeping back then was less exact. Tracking down a blue repainted truck had to be done by sight.
In this particular case, we were looking for a travel-all, or an international travel-all truck. It's like an old Chevy Suburban. So there weren't too many of them around. So we were tracking those things down, and we spent months looking for everybody that was registered or had ever owned one of those. And so that's all time-consuming.
Thunder Bay is a small town, and there are unfortunately a lot of other unsolved murders that take place, and every couple of years you'd have someone that disappears and they're never found.
Then, Friday, August 7th, another body is spotted off the side of the road, just a few miles from where Donna Tebenham was murdered 3 months earlier. The second victim is another Thunder Bay High School student, 16-year-old Bernadette LeClaire.
We were supposed to go dancing. I didn't hear from her. I knew something was wrong.
David Binquist was Bernadette LeClaire's boyfriend at the time she went missing.
And I was just happened to be flipping through the newspaper, and they had a little article about a native girl found in the power lines. My heart almost jumped out of my chest.
The crime scene appears chillingly familiar to Constable Moran.
The victims were the same age. There was no obvious signs of violent death, but there was a plastic bag put over her head.
Shoe prints and tire tracks match the Donna Tebenham scene. Police also make another key discovery.
We found blue repaint chips on both bodies. I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Then police get a promising lead. A woman walks into the station and says she knows who the killer is. She claims her boyfriend, who we will call Ron Newman, picked up a woman at the same corner store where Donna Tebenham was last seen the night she went missing.
She was allegedly an eyewitness to the actual apprehension.
So the police questioned him, and then they arrested him. And he was charged with 2 counts of murder.
Attorney Lee Begg had been working on Ron Newman's case since the day the arrest was made. Police fingerprint Newman, but the prints don't match, and he doesn't drive a blue truck. But police aren't giving up so easily.
We couldn't rule him out as a suspect just due to the fact that his prints didn't match what was found at our scene. He could have been wearing gloves. He could very well not have touched anything.
Nobody minds defending a guilty person, but when it's an innocent person, the task becomes so much more serious because you dare not make a mistake.
And police would learn that they had made a big one. At a preliminary hearing, the OPP's case against Ron Newman falls apart.
Well, she just didn't withstand cross-examination to the extent that the Crown had absolutely nothing to go on. There was no connection between my client and the murders whatsoever.
Finally, after spending 6 months in jail, the charges are dropped.
He was released, but unhappily for him, there was no one else to point the finger at.
We weren't defeated. We were still interested in pursuing the case, albeit from a different angle.
That different angle was a psychic.
One evening I was watching a documentary that involved a woman by the name of Noreen Rainier.
The use of psychics in police investigations is commonplace, but in Canada, almost unheard of. Will the psychic lead the OPP to a brutal serial killer?
I saw so clearly the face of the murderer.
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls has the city demanding answers. Police have a suspect, but not enough evidence to convict. Desperate for clues, a cop calls a psychic.
She had been successful with several American agencies, so I thought we had nothing to lose.
Noreen Renier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
I like touching something off the victims, and metal is better for me. It seems to be a better conduit. It holds the energy or images of what that individual saw just before he or she was killed.
Detective Moran sends her a pair of earrings found on Donna Tebenham, as well as a necklace from Bernadette Leclerc.
When I first start a case, I have to prove to the police that I'm real. And so I always tell them a few things they already know, usually how the person was killed, what he or she looked like, when they were alive, a few things like that to gain their confidence in me as a credible psychic. And then they can ask questions, and my mind just sees what they ask.
Yeah, I felt a little weird about the whole thing. I'd never been involved with a psychic. I'd never even been to a tea reader, but I figured, if it works, who am I to argue with it?
Like most of her cases, Noreen conducts her reading with Moran over the phone.
When I held Donna's earring, I remember seeing her sort of light brownish hair, and I feel she had problems with her S's. I see braces.
She described the victims very accurately, right down to the speech impediment on Tebenham and the character of Leclerc.
I had Bernadette's necklace, so it wasn't that difficult to be able to describe her. I felt more fuller lips. I felt more feisty, confident, a little bit rebellious, again young.
Then Noreen astounds Moran by describing the murder.
Remember, I couldn't breathe. Screaming. I'm having trouble breathing. Didn't feel any knives or guns or wounds of that sort, just not breathing.
It started, being a little unusual that she would know some of this stuff, and I certainly wasn't given this information to her.
Again, I closed my eyes, and I could feel, first of all, I felt a truck. And it was blue, it was low, and it had sort of a flat thing in the back of it.
I was somewhat surprised because that's the color of the vehicle we were looking for, based on the paint chips found in both scenes.
The eyes, I'm seeing the eyes now. On a face, when I close my eyes and I'm trying to describe the murderer, I don't see the whole face at one time.
But the whole face is what the police need, so Noreen sets up a circle group hoping to get a clearer picture of the killer.
I'm seeing an eye. A circle group is people with like minds. We're all hopefully trying to get the same answers. I was teaching at the time an ESP course, and some of my students had heard about the case that I was working on, and they wanted to become involved in it and help me see more. Large ears, more closer to the head. It was so clear. I saw it so clearly. I knew that if I had my artist draw it, that we would have a face for Constable Moran.
She subsequently got a hold of a sergeant from an American police force that had worked with her before, and based on her description, he drew a composite sketch of what she thought our suspect should look like.
Length. There was just a small space between the upper lip and the nose. I made a photostat copy of the sketch and sent it to Constable Moran and waited to hear what he had to say.
When I got the Polaroid picture of the composite sketch, it didn't look like anybody in particular that we had looked at.
Nothing. They didn't know who it was. I was devastated. I felt so like I was on, and he didn't know who my face was. I was just totally devastated.
It looks like another dead end. But Moran is not willing to give up just yet. He sends the psychic a stack of photos, including the photo of Ron Newman.
I didn't really recognize anyone in the lineup. I felt terrible, but I had to tell him. I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
At that point, I was somewhat disappointed, but I knew that there was no point in pursuing something that wasn't there.
But before the cop gives up on the psychic, he has one more question.
Will we get him, and when will we arrest him? And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R.
Moran is stumped by Noreen's clues. Ron Newman was 32 years old, and he had the letter R in his name, but the psychic's sketch looks nothing like him.
The description that she made, really, it was a stretch to make it fit Newman.
The last conversation I had with Constable Moran was when he sent me the lineup of the faces, and that was the last time we spoke.
At that point, the case didn't go very much further. I was taken from the case and put back on general duties because there was no other avenues of investigation to pursue.
I questioned my ability. How could I see so clearly and it be so wrong? What was wrong? My mind, what was happening?
The case goes cold. 2 16-year-olds are dead, and their killer is still out there. Police run occasional Crime Stoppers television spots, but no new leads surface.
It always seemed like they were at a dead end, and that really in the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
In fact, 13 years go by. Then science steps in and reignites a cold case and confirms a psychic's long-forgotten vision.
How could I be so wrong when I had seen so clearly?
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls remains unsolved. 13 years pass, and then a breakthrough in fingerprinting technology offers new hope to cold cases. In August of 2000, an automated fingerprint identification system known as APHIS was upgraded to search and retrieve both finger and palm prints of convicted felons.
This led to numerous cases being cleared up, and one of them was the Tevenham LeClaire case.
Partial prints found on a beer bottle and a plastic bag at the scenes could now be compared against pools of fingerprint records. APHIS turns up a hit, and the owner of the prints is Larry Runholm. In 1990, 3 years after the murders, Larry Runholm, a native of Thunder Bay, had been arrested and charged with drinking and driving. His fingerprints were forwarded to the RCMP and remained on file for 10 years, until the new technology made the match. A case that has baffled cops for 13 years is finally solved. On July 11, 2000, Runholm is charged with the murders of Donna Tevenham and Bernadette LeClaire.
It was a huge story when he was arrested because the community had almost forgotten about these deaths, and the few people that still remember it had almost given up any hope that anyone would ever be arrested and held to account for it.
The arrest finally vindicated a psychic who 13 years earlier accurately described both girls, their dark hair, Donna's braces, and Bernadette's feisty personality. She even envisioned their deaths.
I'm having trouble breathing.
But it was her sketch of the killer that police turned a blind eye 2 years ago that now came back to haunt them.
The profile provided by Noreen Rainier regarding a suspect turned out was amazingly accurate. At the time of the murders, Mr. Runholm was only 19. We have a high school photograph, Mr. Runholm. The prominent nose, the full mouth, the length of the hair.
Other puzzling clues offered by the psychic now seemed to make sense as well.
I remember Constable Moran saying, will we get him, and when will we arrest him? And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R. So I was overjoyed that my information was right. Sad that it didn't help in a timely manner.
Runholm admits to intentionally killing both girls and avoids a jury trial by pleading guilty to second-degree murder.
And Larry Runholm never took the stand, never explained anything. His lawyer said he has no memory of what happened, so he has nothing to offer.
Runholm claims he can't remember what happened back in 1987 when the girls, both 16, were believed to have been raped and then suffocated 3 months apart. But Justice Stanley Carisco, in his sentencing address, says he saw no evidence of amnesia, and he says the families deserve an explanation for these sickening murders.
You know, the guy is a vicious killer, sadistic, and the judge saw through him, and I'm very thankful for that.
To this day, the police don't know exactly what happened the nights the two girls went missing. What they do know is that both girls were suffocated with a plastic bag. DNA testing of semen taken from both girls matched Larry Runholm, and blue paint chips found on both girls matched the paint and make of the truck he drove.
Why did he do it? And how could he live with himself for the next 15 years, where ostensibly he was raising a family and leading a normal life? It's one of those just baffling things that you constantly think about and say, you know, what really happened?
His plea of second-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence.
The ruling of 20 years came as some satisfaction and closure for the families of the victims.
Second-degree murder for two girls. I would have liked to have seen, 22, if not a little bit more. But I am pleased it's over.
There was a certain amount of uncertainty that we had stepping in here today and just wondering where the judge was going to end up. So at 20 years, I think my sister was well served.
Look at that, how many lives he's destroyed. I don't think he got what he deserves, but I know he'll get what he deserves where he's going.
If the police had used the psychic's sketch in their investigation, would the murders have been solved sooner? An article published a few weeks after Runholm's arrest revealed that police did have him in their sights, but he was somehow overlooked.
He had lived on a road with his parents, and his parents were away all summer, had a tourist camp, which they ran, and so he had the run of the house, came and went as he pleased. His house was on the same route that myself and my partner did a door-to-door knock on, and as it happens that the one side of the road that my partner was on was the same house that Mr. Runholm lived in, and he wasn't home the two times we went there. But we had, at that point, we had no reason to suspect Mr. Runholm of anything. He was just another name to be cleared.
The police just using me is right, but they are not used to working with psychics, so they don't understand how we work and how they have to interpret our clues. It's not all factual the way in this reality. My goal, and still will be till it happens, is to train and teach the detectives how to do what I can do.
In hindsight, the clues that Miss Rainier provided, although we were disappointed that we weren't able to successfully charge suspect number one, it did prove to be very accurate for suspect number two, although 13 years down the road. I'm glad I used the psychic because it sort of opens up a whole new avenue of investigation. We had nothing to lose by using her and everything to gain.
How dare I had doubted my own psychic ability. So yes, I was joyful in knowing that my ability was working and does work. And again, like fate, don't doubt, believe.
This time on Psychic Investigators, a young mother vanishes.
Send me a sign. Where are you?
And the police can't find her.
No leads came, nothing.
until a psychic tunes into her spirit
Little blips of things that were coming through.
and claims to see what no one else can.
Could feel her getting dizzy, heart fluttering.
But are his visions too late?
I didn't feel she was alive.
Is the damage already done?
Wasn't adding up.
People involved, they got away with something.
In the shadow of New York City sits Sayreville, New Jersey. Once an industrial powerhouse, by 1996, a bedroom community. Not only do commuters cross the bridge from the big city, but drugs and the damage they do also make their way to Sayreville. On June 1st, 22-year-old single mom Nicole Arocas heads out for a night on the town with friends. The former NYU student lives at home with her parents, leaving her 16-month-old daughter, Dylan, in their care.
She was a good mother. I thought, oh, she's going to be asking me to babysit all the time, and I was just out of all that stuff, and I only had one child, and I didn't want to get back into that, and she didn't. Maybe once a month, you know, she'd ask me to babysit, and always after Dylan was already sleeping at night.
But when Nicole fails to return home that night, her parents know something is very wrong. Recently, Nicole has been hanging out with a bad crowd, with a taste for booze and drugs.
I knew that if she didn't come home and didn't let us know something was wrong, that she couldn't.
The next morning, Nicole's father, Jerry, now deceased, heads straight to the Sayreville police to file a missing persons report. Detective Jim Novak is put in charge of the case.
Parents know if something's really wrong with their child. I said, what do you think? Mr. Arocas came out and said that I think she's dead.
Before you suspect foul play, you try and rule out all of the other common things that normally you find in a missing persons case, especially an adult. There's really no crime to be a missing person.
A description of Nicole and her vehicle, a black 1980 Chevy Malibu, are fed into the National Crime Information Computer System.
To see if any other police department in the United States ever had contact with that license plate. And there was no one that ran her license plate, or her car wasn't found somewhere and run by the police.
Jerry Arocas gives Detective Novak details about his daughter. She didn't like to drive her own car, especially at night. And he wasn't too fond of her choice of friends.
He didn't particularly care for her boyfriend, Michael Reed.
Detective Novak knows Mike Reed. Reed is a suspect in a recent string of car burglaries.
I always thought he was the best liar I've ever met. He would lie to me and smile as he did it. It was almost like Charles Manson type thing.
But her father's biggest fear is that his daughter's recent drug habit, heroin, might have something to do with her disappearance. Detectives start by interviewing some of Nicole's friends, Eric Nordling, Todd Connors, and Mike Reed.
Detectives went into the house to check the house for Nicole. Other detectives interviewed the three occupants, Eric, Todd, and Michael.
And everyone denied having any further contact other than seeing Nicole leave that night to go what they called out to several bars to do some drinking.
As we were leaving, Michael called to me. He said, Mr. Novak, I want you to know, I didn't love Nicole. We were only friends. I looked at Detective Sergeant Sprague, and simultaneously, we said to each other, she's dead. And the reason we felt that way is because he used the past tense, and there was no reason at this point to think of Nicole as anything else than in the present. Unless there was.
But what? There's no evidence to back up a feeling. They continue to pursue the missing persons case, contacting local hospitals, checking towing reports, and connecting with state police. 2 days go by, and there is no sign of Nicole or her car.
At this point in the investigation, we had no leads.
Once you don't come home for a number of days and no one hears from you for a number of days, Now this person is really maybe not just a missing person on their own account, but maybe in fact some kind of foul play may have occurred here.
I would go out on the back porch every night and just look around and say, just send me a sign, something. Where are you? I know you're out here somewhere.
Desperate for any answers, the family is willing to try anything.
My uncle Walt Werner worked for the Hackensack Police Department, and he suggested a psychic that the police force sometimes used.
Frank St. James lives in New Jersey and has a reputation for finding missing persons.
I'm like a human satellite or something, going anywhere. Little blips of things I could draw in, get real close. Sometimes they come really quick in flashes. It's like looking through their eyes.
But his one rule? No immediate family members in the session. Diane Macaluso, Pat Arocas' best friend, goes in her place.
My husband and I took a tape recorder with us to record the session, and we took a picture of Nicole with us.
And what the picture shows him, no one really wants to hear.
I tell you, I don't have a good feeling about it. She did expire sometime Sunday morning.
Single mother Nicole Arocas of Sayreville, New Jersey has been missing for 3 days. Psychic Frank St. James says she's dead.
She did expire sometime Sunday morning.
Oh, my heart sank when I heard that because I was still hoping that maybe she just went off with friends.
The psychic claims to be picking up images of Nicole from the night she went out with friends.
I picked up some drugs Saturday. The turnpike is off of there on one of those little side roads. She's not moving. She's not too far from home. I do feel something by Thursday.
Is the psychic right? Will they find Nicole by Thursday?
I didn't have hope that she was alive. I knew that when she didn't contact us and didn't come home, I knew it. But I just had to find her.
The Arocas invite the psychic to their home. Maybe here he can get a clearer picture of where their daughter might be. Left alone, he moves through the house. It's in the kitchen where Frank claims to connect with Nicole's spirit.
Nicole started to come through really easy. It looked like I was flying up above, near water, a dirt road, bridges, cattails, or her car in the marsh. One of the wheels was in the water, a feeling of closed in. I felt that if I was standing 25 feet away from where she was, I wouldn't be able to see her. I couldn't see it from the road. The only way is from above.
Nicole's father takes the tape of both psychic sessions to Detective Novak. The investigator is skeptical, but he's also reached a dead end.
I am not so naive to think that just because I don't have this special ability doesn't mean it wasn't given to someone else. No leads came, nothing. And it's not like we sat on our hands. I thought it doesn't hurt. Began checking all the areas that would resemble areas described by the psychic. There was an old railroad bridge, area where it was tall cattails, area where it was marshy land, ponds, lakes. We came up negative.
And then the detective remembers something else the psychic had said.
Have they tried a helicopter in any of those particular areas?
We're only 3 days into the investigation at this point, and I'm going to ask for a helicopter. I felt I was going to meet with the resistance.
But the next day, Novak gets his helicopter. It's Thursday, June the 6th.
One of the pilots asked why we're using the state police helicopter. And I said, well, we're following the leads of a psychic with respect to a missing person. I'm saying to myself, oh, please, God, please let us find something. Because if we don't, I am never going to live this down.
5 minutes later, above a secluded marshy area, very similar to what the psychic visualized, they do spot something.
The pilot asked what type of vehicle we were looking for, and I explained to him it was a black Chevy we were looking for. At that point, he said, I think I see something down in the weeds right along the Raritan Bay. As the helicopter made several circles above it to find a landing spot where we could land the helicopter, you could see that there was, in fact, someone inside the vehicle.
But what they see from the air is not so easy to see on the ground.
Well, it was necessary to land on the beach area because of the tall cattails and the debris. It was a landfill, maybe a mile square, just covered with the cattails. You couldn't see anything. We each went in different directions, and as I approached this one curve, I was surprised because suddenly I saw the car, maybe 25 feet from the curve. The psychic indicated that you could be 25 feet from the car and not see it.
The psychic had also said that he had a bad feeling about Nicole, that she was dead.
Look in and I see the remains of what appeared to be a female. I noticed the position of her body. Car doors were locked. I radioed in the registration, confirmed that it was in fact Nicole's car.
Once we opened the door of the vehicle, she didn't appear to be seated behind the driver's seat, that she happened to be more in the center of the vehicle, between the driver's and the passenger side, that the vehicle was still in gear and the ignition wasn't all the way on.
Inside, police find a letter in Nicole's purse, dated June 1st, the night she disappeared.
That appeared to be a semi-suicide note. Yet, there was no evidence that a suicide had occurred here.
I remember being happy that they found her. But it was like I wanted to pass out and I couldn't. I was like halfway, but you know.
My heart just ached for Pat and Jerry and Dylan.
The autopsy finds the cause of death, acute morphine toxicity, a heroin overdose. The county prosecutor rules her death a suicide, but was it?
It didn't make any sense to me that she would do that.
It doesn't add up for the detectives either. First, there's Nicole's letter found in her purse.
The ink on a date was a different color than the body of the letter, and I thought that was strange.
Her mother confirms that Nicole often recorded her feelings, however dark.
Nothing that went through her mind wasn't written down somewhere. Because she was living a dangerous life, and in case something happened, she wanted to make sure that people knew things, especially Dylan.
Then, the location of the car.
And I kept in mind what Nicole's father had told me. She didn't like driving at night, and she would have to drive over discarded railroad ties and roofing material that was discarded in the area. There was no way that Nicole drove herself to this particular location, especially at night. Somebody had to have driven her car there.
And some of the things that really stood out were what wasn't there. No drug paraphernalia, there was no needles, no syringes, other than a ligature on the floor.
And then Detective Novak remembers what the psychic said on the tape. Nicole was not alone when she died.
There's at least 2 or 3 of them. They were there, they knew what happened.
There was more to this than a suicide.
"22-year-old Nicole Arocas has been found dead inside her car, abandoned in a secluded New Jersey marsh. It's ruled a suicide, but a psychic says others were involved, and the lead detective thinks so too.
Anyone reading that letter could easily draw the logical conclusion that this was a suicide. However, they didn't have the information that I had. Her boyfriend, on the first day of the investigation, referred to Nicole in the past tense. The position of her body, the fact that the car was locked.
Most families, once a loved one commits suicide, kind of realize after looking back that the signs of suicide were there. They were depressed or they were having some type of problem. The parents were pretty insistent that they didn't believe that Nicole had taken her own life. And if she did in fact do that, then the crime scene would have been totally different. Usually when you die from a heroin overdose, the death is pretty instantaneous to the injection. There isn't time to remove the syringe from the vehicle, clean up the papers, dust off the dashboard, and make the car kind of neat. If you're going to inject yourself, you probably would have the car in park. The vehicle had actually been left in gear. If she had been, say, trying to leave the scene and all of a sudden the overdose kicked in and killed her, then that vehicle would have run out of gas before the police found her. Yet once we put the vehicle in neutral and turned the key on, it started right up. The suicide note was folded up in her pocketbook. You would probably leave it out in the vehicle. So everything that seemed to be a suicide just didn't seem to be adding up.
If she didn't commit suicide, how did she die? Novak suspects Todd Connors, Eric Nordling, and her boyfriend, Mike Reed.
Couldn't imagine why people I suspected would do such a thing to a friend.
For the detectives, there seems to be only one answer.
Under New Jersey law, if you cause someone's death by giving them a narcotic, it's technically a homicide.
I brought in the people involved, got nowhere.
The case is officially closed, but for Novak, it's still open.
Sometimes it's better to take a step back, let the people involved come to the belief that they got away with something, and they begin to talk and tell friends.
Over the next 3 months, his strategy starts to pay off.
Just as much as I was repulsed by what had happened to Nicole, the friends of Eric, Todd, and Mike Reed were just as repulsed because we began getting information through informants with respect to what is being said. Mike Reed shot up Nicole, and she OD'd, and he dumped her out in the landfill.
That information wouldn't have been admissible in court because it's hearsay.
To have any chance of charging Mike Reed, they need confessions from the people who were with Nicole when she died. They keep waiting.
After the call was processed at police headquarters, it was parked outside for the longest period of time. And every time I left police headquarters, I would look over at the car and I would say, "Come on, Nicole, help me out here." I repeated that probably 100 times.
For the next 3 months, the case eats away at the detective until one December night.
I was serving warrants at an apartment complex, totally unrelated to this, and I find this necklace. It was a child's necklace, the name Nicole.
Although it's not Nicole's necklace, the detective sees it as a sign.
And I thought, this is Nicole's response to me. Maybe it's time that I bring these people in and talk to them again.
But Mike Reed is in jail on an unrelated charge. So Novak brings in his friends, Eric Nordling and Todd Connors.
Eric was the first one to go in because we felt he was the weakest link. Sergeant Burns made Eric aware that he was familiar with Eric's family. His family would be disappointed with what they had done with Nicole. At that point, Eric tears up. Eric began to tell.
But Todd Connors admits to nothing.
I just confronted him. I yelled at him. "This is what you do to her? You leave her there and rot?" And he just looked away. We knew he had him. But he said he didn't want to talk anymore.
Novak needs statements from both Connors and Nordling in order to charge Mike Reed with Nicole's death. A few weeks later, he gets his chance. He brings Todd Connors in on a contempt of court warrant from a nearby town. But this time, he ups the ante. Novak brings in an investigator from the county prosecutor's office. She threatens to charge Connors with obstruction if he doesn't talk. It's Connors' last chance, and it works. Todd finally corroborates what Eric Nordling has already admitted, and what the psychic saw 6 months earlier, that Nicole was not alone when she died. According to their statements, around 8 p.m. on June 1st, 1996, Nicole, Todd, Eric, and Mike Reed head out to buy drugs. A half hour later in Perth Amboy, Nicole cashes her welfare check. At 9 p.m. in Newark, Mike Reed buys heroin. At a rest stop off the Garden State Parkway, Eric and Todd shoot up. Mike Reed shoots up Nicole. Todd and Eric fall asleep. When they come to, they're at the landfill, and Nicole is unconscious. Unable to revive her, they panic. But Mike Reed shows them the letter, the one the police initially took as a suicide note. He wipes down the car, removes all the evidence, and locks the doors. All three walk the 2 miles back to Todd Connor's house.
She would have never done that to them. That's what bothered me. Never. Even if she had to be found guilty, she would have never done that.
On December 16, 1996, Michael Reed is charged with the drug-induced death of Nicole Arocas. He pleads guilty and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Todd Connors and Eric Nordling walk free. Obstruction charges against them are dropped in exchange for their statements.
We had nothing. We found Nicole based on the information supplied to us by the psychic, Frank St. James. And that's it. It's just, I don't see how anyone could dispute it.
I can't explain it, nor would I even attempt to. I would certainly not have a problem with talking to a psychic or talking to the devil himself if it would help us solve some of our unsolved crimes.
I've done hundreds of cases. This was particularly gratifying, I guess, too, and sad at the same time, but I felt I helped the family at least.
Nothing goes right forever. There's no closure, you never see them again. She didn't have a normal funeral, none of it was the same. Everything was messed up.
This time on Psychic Investigators. A wealthy businesswoman vanishes on a shopping trip to Tucson.
We've seen a number of homicides, robberies, kidnappings.
Is it kidnapping or something else? The police have their suspicions, but no proof.
He was tall and handsome. He could talk snow off a snowflake, and he took over her life.
A psychic warns the police to act fast.
I just got a really, really bad feeling.
Or the truth could stay buried forever. Tucson, Arizona, 70 miles from the Mexican border, a city shaped by the surrounding desert. A dramatic backdrop to the story that was about to unfold on December 13th, 2004. At 6 p.m., 67-year-old Taw Benderly frantically approaches the security desk at Park Place Mall. His partner is missing. He tells the guards he dropped Loretta Bowersock off at Dillard's department store at 2 o'clock and arranged to pick her up at 4. He's been looking for her for the last 2 hours. The police are called, and Detective Fabian Pacheco is put in charge of the case.
Tucson, unfortunately, has seen its fair share of homicides, robberies, kidnappings. We do take each and every one of those investigations seriously.
Immediately, Pacheco recognizes the name of the missing woman. Loretta Bowersock and her daughter Terry own a successful chain of furniture stores. Their commercials have been on the air for 20 years.
Thanks to you and Ma, Terry's consignment furniture has expanded again.
There's a beautiful Bernhardt sofa, and you save $1,400.
Police kick the search into high gear.
They had searched all of the Dillard's store, to include the Park Place Mall, the surrounding neighborhoods, without any success.
At first, Pacheco wonders if Loretta may have been abducted for ransom. After all, she is a high-profile millionaire.
Todd Benderly made some indications regarding a possibility of Loretta being kidnapped by some individuals in a white van. And this information further heightened our response to this investigation.
Todd calls Loretta's daughter in Phoenix.
I jumped in my car and drove down to Tucson in 45 minutes, which is normally about an hour and a half. I just remember feeling very frantic. The fear of her being kidnapped was probably the worst for me. I started getting hold of all of the local newspaper because I'd been on the news a lot. And I got pictures of her off of Ta's computer, and we started making posters right away.
Terry and Loretta were like Arizona's success story. We had watched them grow up on television. They started their business together, the consignment business. They were in our living rooms for 20 years.
My mother was a very smart lady. She was very attractive, very talented, full of life.
For 18 years, Loretta has shared that life with Ta Benderly. The story Ta tells police is that they left Tempe, the Phoenix suburb where they live, that morning for a 5-day vacation. They checked into the Residence Inn in Tucson at 12:30 p.m. and went to the mall at 2 o'clock. Police check mall security cameras and make a startling discovery.
We saw that there was no Loretta to be found anywhere within that video.
Does that mean there's something wrong with Ta's story? Ta said he searched for Loretta in the mall for 2 hours.
The video surveillance actually shows them coming into the Dillard's department store and almost immediately going straight to the customer service counter and reporting her as a missing person.
Police get a search warrant for Ta's hotel room and ask Terry to look through her mother's belongings.
There was a lot of stuff all over the bed that he had taken down, guns and ammunition taken from my mother's house. There was a lot of valuables there. But I think probably the most crucial moment was when I saw the jewelry. That probably was the first moment where I thought this wasn't just kidnapping, this was something else.
But what? Police search his vehicle and make an incriminating find. A shovel and a pickaxe.
Those are red flags right away, especially looking at these tools that look like they have dirt and dust on them like they've been used.
Detective Pacheco contacts the police in Tempe. They get a warrant to search Ta and Loretta's home. And in the garage, another disturbing find. Detective Trent Luckow is with the Tempe police.
They found a van parked there, and in the back of the van they found a purse, and inside that purse there were credit cards and a checkbook and ID that all came back to Loretta Bowersock.
The purse, the pickaxe, the valuables, it all points to foul play.
Based on evidence that we had, we were confident that Loretta had never made it to Tucson.
Tucson police bring Ta in for questioning. He's defensive and, curiously, unconcerned about his missing partner.
You need to respect the fact that I'm trying to give you information in as clear a form as I can. I was not prepared to have to account minute for minute for my time.
Plain and simple is she never made it down here. This whole thing is gonna come down like a deck of cards.
The police believe they have a murder on their hands, but without a body, they cannot lay charges. They let Ta Benderly go and put him under surveillance. But Terry isn't content to just sit back and wait. She hears from a friend about a psychic who might be able to help.
Yes.
Mary Ann Morgan is a medium with international credentials and her own radio program.
I'm clairvoyant, clairaudient, which means I talk to those on the other side.
capability of like jumping time with my mind, like look at everything on a TV screen, and it plays out in front of me.
Terry calls Marianne at her home in Bethany, Oklahoma.
It's never easy when you tell somebody that they love has crossed over, especially when they've been murdered.
Arizona businesswoman Loretta Bowersock has been missing for 2 days when a psychic shares a devastating vision with the woman's daughter. Not only is she dead, she's been murdered.
I think that it took a little while for me to get through, and it was hard to hear those things.
Using her paranormal powers, Marianne Morgan claims to see Loretta's last moments.
I kept getting all these visions of screaming and yelling in a fight. And then I saw somebody coming up from behind and putting something over somebody's head. Then I saw somebody suffocating, fighting to save their life. And the more she fought, the worse it was. And then eventually there was just no life at all.
Then the killer appears before the psychic.
When I started seeing this man, I described him in depth and in detail to Terry, and she said, yes, this is the person that her mother had been involved with for a very long time. And I said, Terry, you don't know this man. This man has lied to you. He's got all kinds of money problems, all kinds of financial things that he's created. He's a con artist. And she understood that. However, she really didn't want to believe it.
And there's another psychic bombshell for Terry.
I saw Loretta Bowersock open the door and her be handed a set of papers, and I saw how angry she got, and I knew that the house was in foreclosure, and this was something that she had no idea about.
I said, that's crazy. There's no way that my mom would let her house go into foreclosure. She loved her house.
Could the psychic be right? Terry decides to tell the police about the foreclosure.
We don't use psychics. We're more into the modern forensics, the DNA, the fingerprinting, certain other things that we can do as homicide detectives. But psychics, I'd never used one. I was skeptical.
And I said, you know, all I know is there seemed to be some things that she described that seemed to be accurate. And with us not having any leads coming in, I said it really couldn't hurt.
We did a financial investigation, and that's where we realized this home was in foreclosure. Nobody knew that. That was really astounding, and began to think, well, maybe the psychic could be of service.
In the meantime, the police continue to pull apart Taw's alibi. Taw says he and Loretta left Tempe at 10 a.m. and checked into their Tucson hotel at 12:30. However, the desk clerk says he checked in at 2:48, alone. And his credit card and bank receipts also tell a different story. At 11 a.m., he used his credit card to buy 2 baseball caps at the outlet mall. And at 1:15, he bought 2 sandwiches at the truck stop, just 4 miles down the highway.
We are now faced with a 2-hour block of time that we're trying to determine where exactly was he. And it's very important to us to account for that time.
Police think that during that time, Taw was busy burying Loretta's body somewhere in the Sonoran Desert.
We were headed in the direction to prosecute Taw Benderly for the murder of Loretta Bowersock.
Then, an explosive turn of events. 1 week after Loretta's disappearance, the psychic has another revelation.
All of a sudden flashed before me this vision of Taw Benderly. And I just got a really, really bad feeling. Either this man's going to kill himself or he's going to try to escape.
The net is tightening. All the evidence of Loretta's disappearance points to Taw Benderly. The psychic immediately calls Detective Pacheco.
We were very concerned for Taw Benderly's welfare. Obviously, we don't want anyone to harm themselves. And most importantly, we still don't know where Loretta is. If something ever happens to Tom, the chances of finding Loretta are gone along with him.
At Mary Ann's insistence, the police check up on Tom. He seems fine. The next day, Terry calls Tom several times, but he doesn't answer. In a panic, she contacts the police.
At that point, police probably need to go out there and make sure that he's okay and that he's fine, or that he had not fled. When police entered the house, they found Taw hanging from an extension cord in the garage.
All Taw Benderly left was a suicide note saying he has gone to join Loretta, but nothing about how she died or where her body is located.
What a coward. Not only did this man kill himself, he took all the clues with him on where Loretta was. He never said, here's what I did and here's where she is. This SOB went to hell not telling anybody where Loretta was.
The psychic was dead right about Taw's suicide. But can she help to find Loretta Bowersock? Taw Benderly has taken the secret of Loretta Bowersock's burial place with him to the grave.
Knowing that he had just committed suicide, I lost all the hope of finding out really what happened, if he'd been the one that killed her, and where was she.
When I found out that Taw Benderly had committed suicide, I was thinking about what Mary Ann had told me. I was thinking, what else could we have done? Once the main suspect is dead, there's nobody to prosecute, the case is closed. The only thing left in this investigation to do is to find the remains of Loretta.
But where is she? 3 weeks after her disappearance, the police are no closer to finding her body.
I needed to know what had happened. You know, how was she killed? Was she shot? Was she cut up? Had he bashed her? When you don't have how somebody died, it just makes you crazy.
Desperate, Terry invites psychic Mary Ann Morgan to Tempe. Maybe she can see something the police have missed. They start in the place where Taw took his own life, the garage of Loretta and Taw's soon-to-be repossessed house.
We went out to the garage. A very, very cold entity came to be present with us. I said, Terry, Taw's here in the garage with us. And about that time, he jumped into my mind and he started screaming. He says, she's in the desert, she's in the desert. I told you she's in the desert. It was just very powerful and overwhelming. I knew this was going to be very hard to tell Terry, but unfortunately, I saw her mother wrapped in plastic, almost mummified. And I saw her buried in a very shallow grave.
The desert, a likely place to dump a body. Police already suspect Taw has buried Loretta in the Sonoran, but the psychic sees specific, unique details.
I could see that there was blue. I felt like I was surrounded with blue. And then I heard children laughing. And I could see and I could hear children going around and around on a merry-go-round. So I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be the biggest, one of the biggest keys to this is that she is not even 150 yards from this merry-go-round.
A merry-go-round, the color blue. Mary Ann shares the details with the police, who have a lead of their own. Taw made a cell phone call around the time police think Loretta was buried. Detective Landon Rankin of the Pinal County Sheriff's Office led the search for Loretta Bowersock.
Mr. Benderly's cell phone had pinged on a certain cell phone tower in central Arizona in our jurisdiction of Pinal County.
The cell phone records show Taw had made a phone call at 12:30 in the Sonoran Desert, 94 miles from the hotel in Tucson, where he told police he was. And he had made that call during the 2-hour time gap that he couldn't account for.
I believe it was his dentist had called, so Mr. Benderly opened up his cell phone, returned the phone call. So that basically put his footprint in our area.
The police think Taw was burying Loretta's body in this area of the desert. But even with hundreds of volunteers, they're looking for a needle in a vast haystack.
People who ask the question, how hard is it to find a body in the desert, have never been to the desert. The desert is so enormous. I mean, even with clues, you can't find a body in the desert.
6 months pass, and there's no sign of Loretta. With limited resources, the police halt the search. But Terry Bowersock refuses to give up. For the next few months, each Saturday, locals and tourists alike scour the desert for Loretta Bowersock's body.
Every day that I'd be out searching, I remember I would just think of her and just how important it was not to spend the rest of my life wondering. I wasn't about to let her stay in the desert. That wasn't going to happen. I was going to find her.
Terry was searching every day. I finally just had to tell her that it was not her karma to find the body, that hikers were going to be in the desert about a year later from the time that she disappeared, and that they would come upon the body.
In January 2006, just 150 feet from an abandoned motel, a family out hiking stumbles on a human skull. Dental records confirm these are the remains of Loretta Bowersock.
The teeth that I had noticed had fillings. More specifically, was I saw some porcelain veneers on sort of her front teeth.
When I was told that she was finally found, it was like, oh, thank God. It was a relief to know, I could stop chasing. I did need to have closure. It was amazing when I drove out there, there was a blue motel. It was like when you got there, you went, how'd we not see this much blue somewhere? But we stopped just short of that, 5 miles, before that area.
An autopsy reveals the actual cause of death, asphyxiation by a plastic bag.
When I was first at scene and saw the plastic, I thought it might have been just skin. But we went to the autopsy and it saw that the plastic bag was completely over her head. It came full circle with Marianne's prediction. It was exactly as she had said.
The police reconstruct Loretta's last hours alive. On December 13th, Loretta discovers the foreclosure notice on the house. At 3:33, she makes the first of 17 phone calls to the bank. They confirm her worst fears. Her partner of 18 years has been embezzling the mortgage payments. When she confronts Taw, he panics, fearing his web of lies is about to be exposed. He sneaks up behind her, places a plastic bag over her head, and suffocates her, just as the psychic predicted.
After being involved in this case, I can say that definitely I'm less skeptical of employing the services of a psychic.
I have never used a psychic until this, but the information she gave was pinpoint accurate. A psychic gives us insights that we don't have.
When this case came to a close and I got the phone call that they had found Loretta Bowersock, it was just a sigh of relief that it was finally over.
Taw Benderly was never tried for the murder of Loretta Bowersock. A dead man can't be put on trial.
I felt so bad that I hadn't done something, to rescue her. I hadn't taken her out of the house earlier. I've learned there's a lot of women out there that are lonely and desperate for love. And that, unfortunately, there's men that will take advantage of that. And so I would just simply say to women, if you feel like there's something wrong with the person you're with and you haven't checked them out, do.